Hi, I'm Rabbi Dan Levin from Temple Bethel of Boca Raton. I came to Boca Raton the first time in 1996, and then I came to Boca Raton a second time in 2004. That's all good stories, which I'll be glad to share.
Thank you so much for being with us, Rabbi Levin. I am Sandi Altner, and I am a volunteer with the Boca Raton Historical Society and Museum, and we have the pleasure of having you for this taping at Lynn University, November 2nd, and today is 2006, November 2nd, 2016. And when we're dealing with historical things, we have to make sure we're in the right year. Rabbi Levin, when you first arrived in Boca Raton, what did you find here in the way of a Jewish community to meet you?
Well, the community that I met in 1996 when I came here was much less diverse than it is today. There were two Reform congregations, there were two conservative congregations, and a very small third conservative congregation, and not nearly the depth and breadth of the Orthodox community that exists today. I just saw a tremendous energy and sort of a flowering of Jewish expression. It was just sort of ready to pop. But you see so many different kinds of Jewish expressions here. There are so many newer synagogue communities. There are synagogues without walls that are here now. Everything from humanist to ultra-Orthodox exists in our community now. And the diversity had not yet found its footing when I first came.
1996. So when we look at that time 20 years ago when you came here, what did you find in the way of a Jewish community in Boca Raton?
Well, one of the things that I found was that Boca was exploding, that there was just so much growth happening at that time in the community. And one of the things that I also found was that very few people, if any, were actually from Boca Raton, even from South Florida. So one of the things that I found was that we were welcomed with open arms because everybody we met could relate to what it meant to come to a new community. I remember our very first year for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, the High Holy Days. This family invited us for dinner, and this family invited us for lunch, and somebody else invited us for something else. And I remember speaking to a friend and a colleague who works in Albany, New York. And I said, "What are you doing for the holidays?" And he said, "Cooking." Because no one in that community was used to having anybody who was new. And we had a very, very different experience of just an incredible warm welcome from our congregation and our community. And there was also, I think, a sense that Boca was really coming into its own. There was a lot of growth to the north of the congregation. There was a lot of growth to the western parts of the community outside of the incorporated part of Boca Raton. And there was just a tremendous sense of energy and excitement just around the city itself and the growing Jewish community that was finding its footing here.
Temple Bethel is the oldest Reform congregation here in South Florida. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and celebrating a special mark this year.
Right, this coming March it'll be our 50th anniversary.
When we look at what has happened over 50 years, and if you can just describe to me how that how this synagogue has grown from what it started from and to what it's become today. Could you give us a brief idea of the growth that you've seen?
Well, what I think is so interesting is when we bought our first house here, we bought in Boca Square, one of the older Boca Raton neighborhoods. And I remember speaking to our neighbor who was a member of the congregation who had bought his house in 1972. And when he bought his house, he said to the realtor directly, "Can Jews live here?" And she said, "Well, now they can." And the Boca Raton that we found was one that was much, much different, where the Jewish community was ensconced, the Jewish community was welcomed, the Jewish community was integral to the larger fabric of the congregation. I mean, I think the thing that I remember from my first year was walking into Rabbi Singer's office and seeing two keys to the city on his wall, from all of the work that he had done to help to build the religious fabric of not just the Jewish community, but the interfaith fabric of the community as well. And his work in helping FAU grow to be such an important institution, not just in our community, but in the state of Florida. So when we came, we saw just all of this energy. And what we've seen happen over time is not simply the growth of the Jewish community in numbers, but the growth of the Jewish community in its diversity. So when I came in 1996, there was much fewer Jewish options available as there are now. There was one large conservative congregation, one tiny fledgling conservative congregation. We had our congregation in the Reform movement and Congregation B'nai Israel in the who was another smaller Reform congregation but growing, and the Orthodox community, which has just blossomed in the 20 years since I first came. When I was first here, Boca Raton Synagogue was sort of the Orthodox Jewish option. Now you have 3 different Chabad synagogues, you have a Young Israel synagogue, you have a plethora of other Orthodox congregations in addition to Boca Raton Synagogue that has 2 locations. You have the growth of the Federation campus and the growth of Jewish day schools. When I first came, the only Jewish day school was the Donna Klein Jewish Academy, which was really more of a school for Jewish kids as much as it was a day school. And the beginnings of an Orthodox day school, which was sort of just getting its footing, just the beginnings of an Orthodox high school. Now you have the construction of the Weinbaum Yeshiva High School on the Federation campus. You have the growth of the Hillel Day School. You have other day schools that are growing all around the community in the Jewish world, in addition to the growth of the Donna Klein Jewish community and all the Jewish preschools that are littered throughout the community. So you see a lot more diversity in the community. There was actually, I misspoke, there was actually another conservative congregation built just north of our congregation. But it was the diversity that exists now is much greater than there used to be.
I want to take a step back because what you've talked about here is really how great this is for families, not just Jewish families, families of all kinds who come to Boca Raton. And your family at the time when you were 27 was you and your wife, Amy. Mm-hmm. And did you have children at that time?
Not when we moved here. We had our first son in May of 1997, just about a year after we moved here, and then our daughter 18 months later.
And now you have a third.
And now we have a third. She was born during a hiatus that we took from our time in Boca Raton when we lived up in a small community in Livingston, New Jersey.
And she just celebrated her bat mitzvah, Eliana.
Did.
So when we look at how the community has changed, and when we look at what Boca Raton is today, it's wonderful that we're interviewing you today because just yesterday there was a special event at Temple Bethel that involved national recognition for the temple. Tell me what happened.
So we were contacted by the United States Postal Service that they were trying to find a suitable venue to unveil this year's Hanukkah Forever stamp. And they wanted to come to South Florida and Boca Raton specifically because of the national reputation of the strength of the Jewish community down here. And so they came to our congregation and we partnered with them in having a wonderful event. I learned a lot about philatelics and stamp collecting that I never knew. But we had a wonderful, wonderful celebration with the broad base of the Jewish community to celebrate how Jewish life is a part of the American story, in addition to just being part of our religious community's story. The story of Hanukkah itself is a story about a nation's liberation from tyranny in order that they could live the religious lives they wanted to. And the fact is that the Jewish community in America is the most free and prosperous Jewish community that we've seen probably in 2 millennia by virtue of the incredible protections and freedoms that make for the United States of America, for us and for all religious communities. So to have a chance to celebrate that dedication, the word Hanukkah itself means dedication, and to dedicate this piece of Americana as part of our tradition was really something very, very special.
One of the things that was recognized in that event as well is the fact that at this time, the latest figures that we have in South Florida, approximately 550,000 people of the Jewish faith or who consider to call themselves Jews, whether they are affiliated with temples or not, which brings up some interesting issues. For one, Boca Raton itself, now in 2016, has slightly over half of the population counts as Jewish, which makes us the most densely populated neighborhood in the world of Jews outside of Israel. And I'm wondering how that reflects on the community, as is Boca, in your mind, considered to be a Jewish community primarily today?
Well, I think one one of the things that I've learned in 20 years of living in Boca Raton is that it's much more diverse than people often think it is. It's much more diverse economically. People think of Boca Raton as a very prosperous community, and of course it is in some measure, but there's a lot of diversity economically in Boca Raton. There's a lot of diversity religiously in Boca Raton. But I think because the Jewish people is such a small people, when you consider that there are well over 7 billion people on the planet and there are barely not even 15 million Jews, we're an infinitesimally small people compared to the broader nations of the world. So when you come to a community like Boca Raton where, you know, every second person you meet has some connection to the Jewish people, it's just a remarkable place because there are very, very few places in the world where you'll find even a Jewish minority to the size that we are in Boca Raton. And I think that there's a reason that so many Jews tend to flock here is because it feels comfortable to be here. Judaism is in some ways really woven into the larger civic fabric of the community. There are probably every organized sort of institution as part of the Jewish alphabet soup that has some sense of a connection to South Florida. The major universities in Israel are connected here. Lots of pro-Israel organizations are rooted here, in addition to the synagogues that are rooted here. The broader Jewish fabric that's here as related to the Jewish Federation complex and all the different organizations that support Jewish life. So I think what's really special about Boca Raton is how comfortable we are here. So when kids go to public schools, there are Jewish clubs in the public schools. There are Jewish clubs in the private schools. One of the things that I find most remarkable at Boca Raton is that St. Andrew's Academy, which is an Episcopal school, has somewhere in the neighborhood of 50% Jewish enrollment. I kind of joke sometimes that it's the Jewish Episcopal School of Boca Raton. But when you think about how comfortable the Jewish community is here, that so many people are willing to send their kids to a Christian school because they find it to be such a good educational experience, tells you how comfortable we are in this community.
Rabbi Levin, you are also involved very much on with a national presence and an international presence in Judaism with the work that you do that takes you outside of Boca Raton and takes you frequently to Israel, takes you frequently to other places in the United States and Canada. And I'm wondering what the feeling is that you get about what Boca is to the outside Jewish community, the international Jewish community. Is it recognized as being different than other communities?
Well, I think one of the things that handicaps Boca a little bit is the prominence it played on Seinfeld. Because I think they played up on that sitcom, as sitcoms do, all of the stereotypes about Boca Raton, about it being a place where there are a lot of retirees from the New York area or the Northeast, and playing up all the stereotypes about Jews from the Northeast. And so I think that there's a piece of that is part of our reputation. But one of the things that I've discovered as I leave our community and I spend time around the community is how in some respects, people recognize that this is a very strong Jewish community, and at the same time, what a hidden gem we have here. One of the things that I find to be so incredibly meaningful about life in Boca Raton is, firstly, the way in which the Jewish community interacts and collaborates with the larger religious community. The Boca Raton Interfaith Clergy Association has an incredible camaraderie of Christians and Jews and Muslims from all different walks of life and all different denominational structures, where we're able to get together and collaborate and just enjoy our camaraderie, but also to work on projects together. One of the things that was really extraordinary to me several years ago was how the evangelical community reached out to the Jewish community to commemorate the Holocaust with a March of Remembrance that was an interfaith expression of solidarity and memory of that terrible tragedy. The fact that the evangelical community was reaching out to the Jewish community to work in collaboration and partnership so that the broader community could engage in this commemoration, to me is just remarkable and tremendous. I served for 2 years as the president of the Boca Raton Interfaith Clergy Association, and I treasure the relationships I have with other clergy. Our congregation last year celebrated a 30-year interfaith partnership with St. Joan of Arc Catholic Church, where our religious school teachers and the teachers from their school get together and plan lessons together as they have done for decades. There's an incredibly warm friendship that exists between our congregation and the Catholic community at St. Joan of Arc Catholic Church, to the extent that our evacuation plan in the event of an emergency calls for our kids in our school to evacuate to St. Joan of Arc, and vice versa. If you had told someone 50 years ago that the evacuation plan for a Jewish community was to go find safe haven in a Catholic church, think about what that means, that's just assumed. And that's because of the hard work that's happened over the many years here. Rabbi Singer will tell you that on 9/11, when a bomb threat was thrown into our synagogue, and he raced over to the synagogue from his home, as he's driving down 4th Avenue, he sees hand in hand a parade of Jewish children walking across the street into the sacristy of St. Joan of Arc, where they were going to wait to get picked up by their parents. It was such an amazingly important and symbolic moment. And of course, when Hurricane Wilma came through, they were happy to provide us with electricity and a copier and coffee, which was also very nice. The other thing that was really great is how incredibly collaborative the Jewish community itself is, where the Reform congregations in its leadership and the conservative congregations in its leadership and the diversity of the Orthodox community all work together in incredibly close harmony and collaboration with each other in a real spirit of collective effort and respect, which you don't find in Jewish communities elsewhere.
There are so many things that are complex within the Jewish community, and with as much as we have these wonderful stories of success, there still remains work to be done. There still remains a sense of resistance, I would suggest, by certain people, and the stories that we hear from individuals that for every person you're going to find who thinks, wow, I'm in Boca and I can breathe here, I can be a Jew here and not be afraid. There still, though, is that kind of resistance. Are you seeing that? And are you seeing that there is still a need for further education, and with groups that we don't perhaps understand as well, not just the Catholics and other Christians, but perhaps the Muslims?
Well, I think that we've certainly come a very, very long way in Boca Raton, where I think there are isolated incidents of an individual feeling some sense of an anti-Semitic sting or a remark from somebody. I don't think it is woven into the culture of the city nearly the way that it once was, or remotely in the way that it once was. I mean, when you think about the fact that at our Hanukkah stamp unveiling yesterday, we had 3 of the 5 members of Boca's City Council celebrating this Jewish moment with us, I think that says volumes about where our community is. I think there's always a good use of time and effort for people to get to know each other beyond the stereotypes, beyond the labels, beyond the, well, what do they do in that building? I think we've seen that recently in the way that our community is responding to the Muslim community that lives in Boca Raton. They have made enormous efforts in the last several years to try to reach out to the larger community in Boca Raton to help people understand what Islam is. And what that community is about. And the fact is, the community there is about what all the communities here are about, which is trying to have spiritual lives that matter and to raise their families and to be a part of the fabric of this community. And I think the more that we can break outside the boundaries of our own communities and get to know others and to see them beyond the labels, beyond the stereotypes, beyond all the things that sometimes get manipulated in the media, but just to get to know a person as a person, irrespective of whether they profess a Jewish belief or a Catholic belief, a Christian belief, a Muslim belief, or no belief, helps us to become a stronger community and woven more tightly together.
What do you see as the greatest challenge facing the Jewish community of Boca Raton at this time?
Well, I think actually one of the biggest challenges that we face is the fact that there are so many of us that people take their Judaism for granted. I think there's a sense in our community that you can kind of be Jewish by osmosis in our community. Because there is, I think, part of the culture of Boca Raton that invites people to spend their later years here. There are a lot of people who, for all kinds of different reasons, never really engage in the Jewish community. For whatever their religious needs are, they're able to find things outside of the organized Jewish community. They don't join synagogues. They will stay in their country clubs for a high holiday service, but won't invest in the needs of the community to help with the Federation's annual campaign or to support the needs of Jewish family service or the other ways in which we create strength in our community. And I think that's a challenge. I think the challenge for us as a community is to continue to inspire people to want to invest themselves, mind, body, and spirit, into the civic and religious life of Boca Raton, and not simply to be passive consumers of the culture here. I think any healthy community has a strong civic spirit. And I think one of the challenges for the Jewish community here is to help people feel more engaged in the civic spirit of the community and more engaged in the religious future of the community. And I think that's changing too, because one of the things that we're starting to see is that there is a whole community of young people who grew up in Boca Raton, who went to high school here, who may have gone away to college but are coming back here, are getting married, raising their children here, and bringing their children back to the religious institutions of their youth. That creates, I think, a stronger sense of rootedness for us. So at our Early Learning Center that we built in West Boca Raton to deal with the demographic changes and trends, that's at the corner of Yamato Road and US 441, we now have 215 children in that preschool. And the parents of many, many of those children are kids I remember when they were in confirmation classes, teenagers, and on youth group trips with me when I was an assistant rabbi. So one of the blessings for me of having longevity in this community and being here for the better part of 20 years is to see that generational continuance and reinvestment, so that young people who were themselves young people here are raising their children here. And I think that bodes well for the future of the community.
Rabbi, in the process of working on this project with the Boca Raton Historical Society, I've been privileged to have an opportunity to talk to many of the elder people in our community who have told me very interesting stories about how Judaism has changed for them in coming to Boca Raton, particularly those who were perhaps struggling with very sad circumstances in their families due to war and the Holocaust and so on. And it makes me wonder, in the position that you're in, you have an opportunity not just to talk to people of all ages and to have very serious conversations with little babies as they're having their naming ceremonies and so on. And I'm just wondering, when you talk with children who are really quite young, can you tell from early years who identifies as a Jew in a stronger way than someone who hasn't yet made that decision? Are there people who are very, very young when they come to the decision that they really are at the center of their lives a Jew first?
Well, I think that part of what our congregation is committed to, as I think is true for the broader Jewish community, is to create that sense of rootedness and identity from a very young age. So one of the things that I'm excited about is that as our preschool grows, and we have an infant care program that takes care of 70 children under the age of 2, that their earliest formative memories are Jewish memories. They're in a Jewish context from their very first months of life. Their families build their friendships through the context of the synagogue and the community. And so coming to synagogue for Shabbat and celebrating holidays with us and learning about their culture as they grow into their very young lives becomes almost automatic. So one of the things that always interests me is when I have kids that head off to kindergarten after having been in preschool, in our case, since they were 3 months old, and they get to public kindergarten and they don't do Shabbat on Friday mornings, and the kids say, "Hey, wait, why don't they do Shabbat? We always do Shabbat on Friday. They don't do Shabbat here? What's wrong with this school?" So, to me, that tells you that you have someone who's rooted. But one of the things that I also see is that inspiration is very powerful, and when you can get somebody at a time in their life when they can be inspired by a Jewish connection or a Jewish interaction or a place, it can be incredibly important and transformative, and it sometimes goes in waves. So there are young people who are very rooted in their religious life, when they're in their teenage years, they head off to college and they sort of drift away for a little while. They try other experiences. Then they sort of move into their adult lives and they come back to that because they're raising children or they're married or they're rooting themselves or they're older and wiser and they realize the importance of taking care of their spirituality as much as taking care of the other elements in their life. But one of the things that gives me great joy is when we're able to really be a safe place for someone. So I remember years ago there was a young family, it was a typical, Boca Raton Jewish family, mom, dad, son, daughter, who lived out in West Boca Raton, and they were typical of just about every other suburban Jewish family. And then mom got suddenly very, very sick and ultimately passed away after a short illness with cancer, leaving her husband and her 2 teenage children. It was terribly tragic, and we really did our best as a community to be there for their family. And one of the things that I remember is how this young woman who lost her mother not long after her bat mitzvah really found at Bethel a home away from home, so that she really spent her adolescence volunteering at the synagogue, being part of the youth group at the synagogue, built a tight relationship with me as her rabbi, to the extent that I remember one time at a Purim carnival, she looked very sad, and this is a kid who never really looked so sad. So I said, "What's the matter?" She says, "Can I talk to you?" And I said, "Sure." So she came in my office and she sat down, and I said, "So what's the matter?" And she says, "Well, there's this boy, and we were together last weekend, but this weekend he's holding hands with another girl, and I don't understand what happened, and now he won't talk to me." And I'm thinking 2 things. One is I'm thinking, darn, this is where you need your mother, and she doesn't have her mother. And the second thing is I felt just incredibly humbled and flattered that she wanted to talk to her rabbi about this. There have been moments when our congregation has had to endure terrible, terrible tragedies. There was a longtime member of the community whose family is rooted in Boca Raton, Steve and Dana Brown, who own Brown's Furniture that has been on Federal Highway forever. And Steve was a big part of not just the Jewish community and our synagogue, but the broader Boca Raton community, the furniture industry, the Chamber of Commerce, just a big part of our community. And Steve was killed very suddenly in a biking accident. And I remember speaking to his son, right after they discovered that he had been killed. And I said to his son, "Where are you? I'm coming." And they could have gone anywhere at that moment in their life. They could have gone to their house. They could have gone to a friend's house. They could have been anywhere. He says, "We're all coming to Temple." So his mom and he and his sister and his brother and their extended family, who are all part of our congregation, spent the afternoon in my office as they tried to come to grips with this incomprehensible loss and to sort of make their way through those first steps of where do we go from here. And I remember thinking that was the greatest compliment anybody could ever pay to the Jewish community or a synagogue, that in the worst moments of anyone's life, the place they wanted to be was their synagogue. And I think that's why it's so important to have a religious community. I'll never forget Dana said to me right after the funeral, she says, "I don't know how people who don't have a synagogue can do this." And that's why we exist. That's why we're here. That's why the Jewish community is such an important, valuable part of the fabric of Boca Raton itself as a city.
One of the extensions of that care in the community goes to JARC, the Jewish Association for Residential Care. Mm-hmm. And we were very fortunate to have Dr. Deborah Hallow come and
wonderful.
talk with us as well. And she spoke about this relationship that exists between JARC and Temple Bethel, and how there is something. Could you tell us a little bit about how that takes shape? What's the special relationship that exists there?
Well, I will tell you, I think JARC is a trophy for our community. I just feel like it's such a unique and special program that does such an enormous world of good for families and obviously for the 100 and more residents that have their lives. I mean, their beautiful, I guess, tagline that says, "Helping extraordinary people lead ordinary lives," to me just resonates so true. So for many years, the residents from JARC have thought of Temple Bethel kind of like their synagogue. And so on Saturdays, for years and years, they have come to spend Shabbat services with our community. When I first came to town in 1996, I noted that they would come periodically to sit in the back of a celebration of a young person's bar mitzvah, which wasn't, I think, a useful experience for them. So we created a congregational Shabbat morning service. And JARC members come from a variety of their different group homes to participate. They are our regulars, and they participate in the service. They help to read parts of the service. They share with us their life cycle events. We celebrate birthdays. I think one of the moments that was, I think, most moving to me was years ago, one of the women who lives in one of the group homes, a woman named Marcia, lost her mother, and she was grieving. And so she came to synagogue, as she did every Saturday, and they don't know how to say all the prayers, but they know that the last prayer is the prayer that we say to remember people who've passed. And so when we went around, he said, who has the names of people to remember? Marcia stood up and said, my mother, and all of the other residents from JARC stood around her to help her and hold her, literally, as a family, to help her say Kaddish. But what was even more moving was I saw the members of our congregation gather around all of the JARC residents in an even broader embrace to help this individual cope with the loss of her mother. And for us as a community to be able to feel like we're their synagogue has become very powerful. One of the things that's happened as JARC has matured as an organization is many of their residents age. And as it's designed to do, that's where they spend the last part of their lives. So it's been our honor as a congregation to help residents from JARC and their families to commemorate the loss of their family members when they pass on. And we're always saddened, of course, but honored when we're called by JARC to help a family through the grieving process or to commemorate a loss or a funeral as their synagogue. And we're very, very blessed and incredibly grateful for the partnership that we share with JARC and the other agencies in the Jewish community.
Some years ago, you and I did an interview also about JARC and its special way of touching the broader community. And I would like to ask you to tell me about how JARC helps to break down this resistance, and in terms of how people, sometimes when they don't understand something, or if they see someone who isn't physically the same that they are, they're challenged in a different way, and that there's a lesson there for Jewish people and for the broader community as well, and that by working with JARC, by coming to their events, by celebrating their sports activities and various things, there's an opportunity for us to learn as well.
Oh, for sure. One of the things that we learn in the Zohar, in the Kabbalistic books of Jewish mysticism, is an idea that the Torah isn't just a story, right? That the story, the language, the parchment of the Torah is really like a garment, that the inner energy, the inner truth of what Torah is covered. And I think in many ways, human beings are very much like that too. There is this outer garment, not just our garments, but this outer physical self that houses a spirit that is unique and holy and precious and created in the image of the one God that unites us all. And I think sometimes we all get hung up on what you see on the outside. We get obsessed with the vessel and not the spirit that it contains. And I think that what our congregation is enriched by in the work that we do with JARC, when we have social action projects that we share with JARC, when they come and spend Shabbat and holidays with us, when we go into the houses and do programs with them, is that we come to realize that whether a person has typical mental abilities or whether someone has extraordinary mental abilities or limited physical capacities, that's really just the shell, that's really just the garment that inner spirit wears. And when you get to know members from JARC and you get to know these people, you come to see that light, you come to see that energy and that humanity that is often hidden because their physical differences or their intellectual capacities are more limited. One of the things that I'm very grateful for is because our new preschool is right next to 4 of the JARC group homes, we now have the residents from JARC come and celebrate Tat Shabbat with our preschoolers. Initially, I wasn't sure they would want to because they tend to want more adult experiences, but it's close and it's local and the kids are cute and they like that too. So who doesn't like little children? So what's great is that now we have JARC residents who are interacting with little children at an impressionable moment of their life and with their parents and their grandparents while we all celebrate Shabbat together. So these young people who are students in our school find it perfectly normal to see someone who has physical differences, who have there's a sense of normalcy of dealing with someone who has different kinds of intellectual abilities. And they can ask their parents questions. Why does that person look different? Why does that person walk funny? Why does that person talk funny? And we can give them positive, affirming answers that help to shape their moral core as they grow. And that's ultimately what religious education is all about.
In everything you do, there seems to be this desire to help people find their spiritual way, but also to find tolerance. And I would say that that's true of many of the organizations that you talked about earlier, that the working together within the Jewish community, even when there might be very strong views about one thing being correct for one group, but not necessarily being correct for another, whether by tradition or changing needs to meet a community that today does not look like it did 30 or 40 years ago when the community was really starting to grow here in Boca Raton. Mm-hmm. What remains, do you think, to be the biggest things that need to be accomplished, if I can put it that way, by the Jewish community? Is there a leadership role for Boca Raton, for example, in Judaism internationally? Is there a relationship with Israel that ought to be extended beyond where it is right now? What are the things that worry you as a rabbi who does participate in the external world in Judaism in this way?
Well, I think actually one of the things that we as a community can do for the broader Jewish world is serve as a model of what a diverse religious community looks like, where the different streams and ideologies within Judaism all work in an incredibly respectful and collaborative fashion. We had a program led by the Jewish Federation last year on what was called Jewish Unity Day, where all of the different community organizations, all the different synagogues come together to just celebrate the fact that we're all Jewish. And I think that there are very, very few communities like ours where there is such a tight-knit relationship between the rabbis and the religious leaders of the Orthodox and the conservative and the Reform congregations. We don't see eye to eye on all kinds of different religious matters, but we do so in an incredibly respectful way. So in our congregation, we take very seriously our commitment to gay rights. And we don't believe that God is gendered, and we don't believe that love is gendered. And we have taken a lead to try to create a place in the Jewish community where people who are gay or straight or irrespective of their sexuality are able to find a Jewish community that will embrace them for who they are. So 2 years ago, we had a very large forum to try to promote civil rights for gays, especially as it relates to marriage. Ironically, just a week before our event, the Supreme Court issued its ruling in Florida that allowed gay men and women to marry irrespective of gender, which was an incredible gift and a celebration that we commemorated that night by doing a wedding on our bima for two men. Obviously, the Orthodox Jewish community isn't going to embrace that part of our mission the way that we do. At the same time, we try very hard to bend over backwards to be accommodating when we do things with the broader Jewish community to help the Orthodox community feel like we embrace them and that it isn't a competition and it isn't an adversarial relationship. So that's one of the things that I think all of us in the rabbinate in Boca Raton take very seriously as a thing that we would like to give to the broader Jewish world. This is what it looks like when it's done well. A second thing that I think is that Boca Raton represents an incredible center of commerce. And I think it would be wonderful if Boca Raton could build stronger economic ties to Israel, because I think the same entrepreneurial spirit that we embrace in our community is very similar to the culture that I feel in Israel when I'm there. We may speak a different language and we may have different other cultural expressions, but I think there's an awful lot that connects us between Israelis and citizens of our community. And I would love to see bridges built that way. The last thing, though, I think is that when I think about myself as a Jew and I think about the broader city in which I live, Jewish and non-Jewish, what I've come to realize, as I think you expressed, is that there is so much more that unites us as individuals than divides us. We may look at the world differently politically. We may look at the world differently religiously. We may look at the world differently in a whole host of fashions. But when you boil it down, we are really all one. And I think that the strength of our community will be found in our recognition of that, of the motto of our country, E pluribus unum, out of the many we are one. And I think that part of what is at the core strength of Boca Raton as it's grown over the 20 years that I've been privileged to be a citizen here is that we are embracing that as a truth and making that a mission so that we are able to build strong and collaborative relationships that can advance the causes that we all share as a people, as citizens of this city.
Rabbi Levin, there are so many things that you have that you speak so eloquently on, and I appreciate your time today, but I don't want to let you go before we talk about one more thing, which is the future of the Jewish community as it relates to our young people. Mm-hmm. So now with these many years that you have been here, and you have talked about how you're starting to see some people come back, but what about the opportunity to leave Boca Raton because the kids go to college, they go off to different places? Do they ever come back? Or do you see that we're just raising this community of young people that will go off and find Judaism elsewhere and not come back to Boca Raton? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the Jewish people have been wandering for a long time, and we're going to continue to wander. And I think that in this global neighborhood that we live in today, we are more mobile as a people than ever. And so it doesn't surprise me or necessarily even sadden me when people who are raised in our embrace go find their lives in other parts of the country or the world. I think that's part of our job, is to give our young people a moral core and a sense of their identity and an understanding of their mission and purpose, and then give them wings to fly and see where they go. But one of the things that I always feel so grateful for is when they use those wings and they fly home. And they root themselves here. And I think there's a lot of glue that helps young people to choose that. One is their parents and their grandparents are here. And there are a lot of people who are raised in this community with a connection to their grandparents because there are a lot of people who retire here that more than other communities. So I remember in the years that I worked in New Jersey, I used to hear people talk all the time about, oh, you knew my grandmother in Boca. Oh, you knew my mother in Boca. Oh, you knew my father when you were down in Florida. And I think there are a lot of people that move here because they want to be closer to have those generations share their lives together. There are many people in our congregation who moved here specifically because they wanted to be closer to their parents who are aging, and who return here because they want their children to be raised in the close proximity to their parents and grandparents. It's not an uncommon thing for us to see 4 generations sitting together in synagogue, which to me is something that's really very, very precious. And I think the best example that gave me so much joy was there are 2 mothers who have lived in our community for well over 30 years, who met each other in the obstetrician's office when they were both pregnant with their daughters. And their children were actually had the same due date, so they were born in very close proximity to each other. Well, these little girls grew up together in preschool, were best friends through elementary school and middle school and high school. They went to different universities, but came back to Boca Raton to build their professional lives. And they both got pregnant at pretty much the same time with girls, and had their girls within a couple of weeks of each other. And their girls are now in preschool together at Temple Bethel. So if there isn't a better expression of Ledor Vador, from generation to generation, than that, I don't know what there is. And it just gives me just a great sense of joy to see that generational progression unfold. And I think there's so much to offer a young person in this Jewish community. I can't think of a better place where someone would want to raise Jewish children than here in Boca Raton.
Thank you so much. And I do also want to say again, congratulations on 50 years of Temple Beth El of Boca Raton, and give you a final word on what you are looking forward to most.
Well, I'm hopeful that in the next 50 years, the Jewish community here will continue to prosper, and the Jewish community will continue to find its own spiritual mission in collaboration with all of the other amazing community organizations, both Jewish and non-Jewish, that are here in this city. I'm also hopeful that we as a community will really become almost like Isaiah prophecy, a light to the nations, where we can create here almost a utopia, where we can demonstrate that people from diverse religious backgrounds, people who come from different parts of the world, people who embrace different faiths, can really build tremendous bonds of collaboration and friendship and civic harmony to make a difference, to take care of the poor and the needy, to take care of those who are vulnerable, to bring a greater sense of social justice and purpose and cultural expression that enriches the lives of everyone. And I think that if we set that as our mission, we will all grow together.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. Thank you for taking the time to come and see us, Rabbi Levin.
Thank you, Sandi.